The valley of Noril was wide and green, but at its center stood a thing that troubled all who lived there. It was not a mountain or a river, nor was it a storm that came and went. It was a tree, a single tree, taller than the highest cliffs, older than the oldest story, and harder than the sharpest blade. The people of Noril, the Terran, called it the Shadow Tree, for it covered the land with its heavy shade and stole the light that crops needed. Every child in Noril grew up hearing the same words: do not go too close to the tree. Do not touch its roots. Do not dream of cutting it, for no hand has ever broken it. The Shadow Tree was no ordinary tree. Its bark was dark, harder than stone, and when struck with an axe, it gave back a sound like iron. Its leaves were few, but they were heavy and sharp, falling like blades during the dry winds. The roots spread across the soil like veins of poison. Wherever they reached, no plant grew, no water stayed clean, and no fruit ripened. The Terran people had tried for many years to deal with it. Long ago, their ancestors brought fire. They built piles of wood around the great trunk and set them ablaze. The flames licked the bark and burned for days, but when the smoke cleared, the tree stood untouched, its bark blackened but unbroken. Later, they brought stone tools, sharper and stronger. They struck again and again, but the blades shattered. Still later, they discovered metals, soft and weak compared to the strength of the tree. Hammers cracked, spears bent, and the tree gave no sign of pain. It only stood there, year after year, unmoved, a giant that no Terran could ever defeat. As time passed, the people stopped trying. They built their homes away from its roots. They planted their crops in the distant fields where the shadow did not reach. But still, the valley suffered. Each year the roots spread further, and each year more land turned barren. The Shadow Tree became not only a curse but a symbol. It was the weight of failure carried through generations. Stories grew around it. Some said the tree was a punishment placed upon them for forgotten sins. Some said it was a test from the stars to measure their strength. Others said it was alive in ways no tree should be, guarding itself against every strike. None of these answers gave peace, and none solved the truth. The tree remained, and the people could not remove it. Children sometimes dared each other to go near it. They would creep to its base, touch the roots, and run back before fear caught their breath. The elders scolded them, warning that the roots carried sickness and that the shadow carried hunger. No child was ever allowed to stay near it for long. One elder, named Dorn, often stood at the edge of the poisoned ground and stared at the Shadow Tree. His beard was silver, his eyes deep with years of watching the valley lose its light. He had led the last great attempt to burn the tree many seasons ago. He remembered the heat, the smoke, the hope, and then the silence when the fire gave way to nothing. He carried the memory like a scar. To him, the tree was not just wood and roots. It was a reminder that his people could be strong, yet powerless. Still, life went on. The Terran planted in the far fields. They hunted in the mountains. They sang songs at night. But none sang of the valley's center. No music, no festival, no prayer was offered there. It was a place of silence, broken only by the whisper of wind through branches that never truly bloomed. The younger generation, sometimes, asked questions. Why must the tree remain? Could they not try again with sharper tools, stronger fire, or cleverer plans? The elders always gave the same answer. It has been tried. The tree will not fall. Yet in the hearts of the youth, doubt grew. If their people had failed for centuries, did it mean they would always fail? Was it true that the tree could never be cut? Or was it only true that the Terran had lost their will to keep trying? On nights when the moons rose above Noril, some of the young would gather and whisper about leaving the valley altogether. Perhaps there were lands beyond the mountains where no cursed tree spread its shadow. Perhaps their people were not meant to live in its reach at all. These thoughts frightened the elders, for if the youth left, the valley would fall silent, and the shadow tree would claim it fully. But leaving was not simple. The valley had rivers, caves, and fertile land far from the roots. It had been home for generations. The Terran were bound to it, even while the tree stood against them. And so, season after season, the same cycle returned. The sun rose, and the shadow fell. The crops grew, but less each year. Children played, but never near the valley's center. Elders watched, but no longer tried. The shadow tree remained, patient and eternal. There was one moment each year when the Terran remembered their failure most clearly. During the harvest gathering, when the people brought what little they grew to share, the tree's shadow stretched across the plain like a black wall. Even during celebration, the sight of it reminded them of what they could not change. Many would lower their heads then, refusing to look at the towering trunk, for it was like looking at their own defeat. Still, the story of the shadow tree spread beyond Noril. Traders who visited carried tales of it to other lands. Some laughed at the story, saying the Terran must be weak to fear a tree. Others spoke in awe, believing the tree was no natural thing, but a relic from an ancient time. A few even dreamed of seeing it themselves, though most never dared. The Terran accepted these views with silence. Outsiders could laugh, but they did not live in its shadow. Outsiders could speak of strength, but they had never struck the bark and felt their tools break. Only the Terran knew the true weight of the tree, and only the Terran knew how deep its roots had sunk into their history. Yet for all their knowledge, the truth remained simple. No hand among them had ever cut the tree. No fire among them had ever burned it. The shadow tree stood, unmoved, untouchable, and undefeated. It was in this state of despair, with the valley quiet and the people weary of struggle, that change at last began to stir. For somewhere beyond the stars, someone was coming. Someone who would look upon the tree not as a curse, not as a punishment, but as a challenge. Someone whose hands did not carry the memory of failure, but the will to try again. The valley of Noril had grown used to silence. The Terran worked their fields, raised their children, and told their stories, but always with the shadow tree standing at the center. Life moved slowly, with no change. The people had long accepted that their fate was tied to the impossible tree. But one morning, a sound broke the valley's stillness. It was not the cry of a bird or the roar of a beast. It was a strange hum, steady and low, that drifted across the air like the beating of wings made of metal. The Terran looked up and saw something shining against the sky. It was a ship, though. They did not know that word. To them, it was a silver shape, long and smooth, moving with no wind and no wings. It lowered into the valley with a soft light beneath it, like fire that did not burn. The people gathered, whispering with both fear and wonder. When the vessel settled on the grass, a door opened and figures stepped out. They walked on two legs like the Terran, but their clothing was strange, their tools even stranger. At the front was a man named Rian. He was human. His hair was dark, his eyes sharp but kind, and his steps carried both caution and confidence. The Terran had heard of travelers from distant stars, but few had ever visited Noril. To see them now felt like a story made real. Children hid behind their mothers. Elders frowned, uncertain if this arrival was a blessing or a threat. Only Dorn, the silver-bearded elder who had watched the shadow tree all his life, stepped forward. "Who are you that come to the valley of the Terran?" Dorn asked, his voice steady. Ryan bowed slightly, showing respect, though he knew little of their customs. "We are explorers. We come from beyond the skies. We seek knowledge of your land and the stories it holds." The Terran murmured among themselves. Some feared strangers with tools of fire and ships of silver. Others felt hope stir in their hearts, for maybe outsiders could bring something new, something the valley needed. The Terran welcomed them with caution. They brought the explorers to their homes, gave them food, and asked questions about the worlds, beyond the mountains, the rivers, and the stars. The humans listened in return, learning about the valley, the people, and the strange tree that stood in its heart. It was on the second day that Ryan first saw the shadow tree. He had walked with Dorn to the edge of the poisoned ground. The old elder stood with his staff, pointing toward the towering trunk. The roots stretched far, the bark dark as iron, the shadow heavy as night. "This is our curse," Dorn said. "It poisons the soil, takes the light, and resists every strike. For centuries we have tried. For centuries it has stood. The shadow tree will never fall." Ryan did not answer at once. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the bark, the roots, the spread of shadow. He placed a hand on the ground, feeling the hardness of the roots below. He walked around the base, studying the trunk, its height, its thickness. He did not look with despair, but with the quiet focus of someone measuring a problem. At last, he spoke. "You say it cannot be cut, but I see a tree, and every tree has a weakness." Dorn shook his head. "You do not understand. This is no ordinary wood. It breaks our blades and mocks our fire. No hand among us has ever scarred it." Ryan touched the bark with his palm. It was rough, cold, and harder than stone, but he smiled, faintly. "Perhaps no hand among you. But I am human, and humans do not stop at the first failure." The elder frowned. "You think you can do what generations of Terran could not?" "I think," Ryan said calmly, "that every barrier can fall if the will is strong enough. The tree may be mighty, but it is not eternal. Nothing is eternal." The word spread quickly among the people. A human had looked upon the shadow tree and spoken not with fear, but with challenge. The Terran gathered that evening, filling the meeting hall with voices. Some laughed at the human's pride. Others whispered with hope. Could it be true? They asked. Could the stranger truly bring down the shadow tree? But there were also voices of doubt. What if he fails like we did? What if he angers the tree and brings greater curse upon us? Dorn listened to them all, then raised his hand for silence. The human has spoken boldly. He may try if he wishes, but we must not place our hope too high. We have seen failure too many times. Ryan stood in the hall, listening to their doubts without anger. When the voices faded, he said only this: "Hope is not something you should bury. It is something you should plant. Let me try, and you will see." That night, the Terran could not sleep easily. Some dreamed of the shadow tree crashing to the ground. Others dreamed of broken tools and wasted effort. Children asked their parents what might happen if the tree truly fell. None knew the answer. Meanwhile, Ryan prepared his tools. His companions, fellow humans, warned him of the risk. "This tree is no ordinary wood," one said. "It may take more than strength. It may take time, and the people may lose faith, if it is not quick." Ryan nodded. "Then I will give time. I will give strength. If it takes days, weeks, or seasons, I will not stop. For if the Terran cannot believe in their own hands, perhaps they can believe in mine." The next morning, he returned to the valley's center. The Terran gathered in a circle, silent and watchful. Children clung to their mothers. Elders leaned on their staffs, all eyes fixed on the humans standing before the shadow tree. Ryan lifted. His axe, a tool made of human steel, sharper and harder than any the Terran possessed. He placed its edge against the bark and drew a breath. Then, with one strong swing, he struck. The sound rang through the valley. Not the dull crack of stone, not the shattering of weak metal, but a clear note as the blade bit into the bark. For the first time in living memory, the shadow tree gave way, leaving a thin scar where none had ever been. Gasps rose from the Taran. Their eyes widened, their hearts raced. They had seen countless failures, but never this. The tree had been touched, marked, wounded. Rian stepped back, sweat on his brow but resolve in his eyes. He lifted the axe again. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. The sun rose slowly over the valley of Noril, spreading light across the hills and rivers. Yet in the center of the valley, the shadow tree still stood, its dark shape swallowing the light. It had stood for centuries, unbroken and unmoved. But now, for the first time, the people of Noril gathered with a different feeling in their hearts. The day before, a human had struck it, and the impossible tree had bled. Ryan's single swing had left only a thin mark, but that mark was more than the Terran had ever made in countless years. They could not stop speaking of it. Children whispered about the sound the axe had made. Elders argued if it had been luck, or if the human truly carried strength beyond their own. The young watched the scar on the tree as if it were a doorway to a new future. Dorn, the silver-bearded elder, sat on a flat stone at the valley's edge. His eyes studied the tree and the man who now stood before it again. He had lived long, enough to see many failed attempts. He did not wish to believe too quickly, but he could not deny what he had seen with his own eyes. The human's axe had bitten where none had before. Ryan stood with steady calm. He carried the same axe as yesterday, its head of steel shining in the morning light. Around him the Terran formed a wide circle, keeping to the safe edge where the poisoned roots ended. They were silent, waiting for him to begin. He did not rush. Instead, he ran his hand over the mark from the first strike. His fingers pressed against the scar, testing its depth. The bark was thick, harder than most stone, but the cut was there. He nodded, more to himself than to the crowd. "This tree can fall," he said quietly, though his voice carried across the circle. "It will take time. It will take strength, but it can fall." The Terran shifted uneasily. Some wanted to believe, others feared disappointment. Still, they watched. Ryan raised his axe. With careful aim, he struck again. The sound echoed, a sharp crack that rolled through the valley. The blade sank a little deeper this time, carving into the dark wood. Sap oozed from the wound, thick and strange, glistening like tar. A wave of gasps swept the crowd. Children clutched at their parents' robes. Some of the elders whispered prayers, uncertain if they should rejoice or fear. No one had ever seen the shadow tree bleed. Ryan wiped sweat from his brow, then struck again. Another mark, another cut. The tree groaned faintly, not like a voice, but like the sound of weight shifting deep inside its trunk. By midday, he had struck many times. The base of the tree now carried several deep scars. They were small compared to its massive size, but to the Terran it was like seeing cracks form in a mountain. Something they thought eternal was no longer untouched. Dorn finally stepped forward, leaning on his staff. His voice was low, but all could hear. "You have done what no Terran has done in 1,000 seasons. But the tree is vast, and you are one man. How can you hope to bring it down alone?" Ryan lowered his axe and faced the elder. "One strike is not enough. 100 will not be enough. But thousands, given with patience and will, can bring down even the mightiest of walls. It is not about the size of the tree. It is about not stopping." Some Terran nodded, inspired. Others frowned, doubting. "The tree will outlast him," one whispered. "He will tire, and it will remain." But others felt something different, stirring. What if he does not stop? What if he truly keeps striking until the tree falls? The rest of that day passed with the rhythm of Ryan's labor. Strike after strike, the sound filled the valley. His arms ached, his hands blistered, but he did not pause except to drink water and rest his breath. The crowd stayed, unable to look away. Each cut seemed to carry not only steel, but determination. When the sun began to set, Ryan laid down his axe. His body trembled from exhaustion, but his eyes still held the same steady fire. He turned to the people. "This is only the beginning. Tomorrow, I strike again." The Terran looked at each other. They had seen their elders give up after one day of failure. They had seen fire burn and fade, leaving the tree untouched. But this man, though tired, did not speak of giving up. He spoke of tomorrow. That night, the valley was alive with talk. Around fires, families repeated what they had seen. "He cut it again and again," they said. "The tree bled sap like black tar." Children asked their parents if the tree might truly fall. Parents had no answer, but for the first time in many years, their voices carried less despair. Dorn sat alone outside his hut, staring at the distant shadow of the tree under the moonlight. He remembered his youth, when he too had believed the tree could be conquered. He had lost that hope over decades of failure, but now, seeing the human's persistence, he felt something stir in his chest that he had thought gone forever. The next morning, the people gathered once more. Ryan was already at the tree, sharpening his axe with calm focus. He greeted them with a nod, then set to work. Strike after strike, the sound rang out. Some of the younger Terran moved closer, eager to see the cuts for themselves. By midday, one of them, a boy no older than 10 seasons, whispered, "He is doing it. He is truly doing it." Dorn overheard and felt the weight of those words. The boy had spoken not with doubt, but with belief. It was a small thing, yet it was powerful. Hope, once planted, could spread like fire through dry grass. The shadow. Tree stood tall, its trunk still massive, its roots still poisoning the soil. It did not fall, not yet. But it was no longer untouchable. It carried scars now, marks of human will. The days in the valley of Noril began to change. For as long as anyone could remember, each morning had been the same. The sun would rise, the shadow tree would stretch its great darkness across the land, and the people would begin their quiet work in the distant fields. But now there was a new rhythm. At dawn, the people no longer walked first to their fields. Instead, they gathered near the poisoned ground at the valley's center. There, a single man swung his axe again and again against the bark of the tree that had mocked the Terran for centuries. The sound of metal striking wood carried far through the valley. It was not a soft sound. It was sharp, clear, and steady. With each strike, dust of bark and drops of black sap scattered, marking proof of progress. Ryan did not tire quickly, though the work was hard. His arms ached, his back burned, and blisters grew on his hands, but he pressed on with calm determination. He rested only when the sun was high or when his companions urged him to drink water. Then, after only a short pause, he lifted the axe once more. At first, the Terran came out of curiosity. They stood at a distance, whispering, waiting for the moment when the human would finally give up like all who had tried before. But days passed, and he did not stop. The scars on the tree grew deeper and wider, spreading like dark wounds across its surface. Soon the whispers began to change. "Look how much he has cut," some said. "The tree bleeds more each day," others murmured. "Perhaps it can be done." Children began to sit on the grass and watch him for hours, their eyes wide with amazement. They counted each strike, cheering softly when the blade sank deep. For them, it was not only a man cutting wood. It was a living story being written before their eyes. The elders, however, were slower to believe. Dorn often stood near the front of the crowd, leaning on his staff. His old eyes followed every swing. Though he would not admit it, He felt a stirring in his chest that had been buried for decades. Yet he kept his doubts. "The tree is mighty," he reminded the younger ones. "It may bear wounds, but it still stands tall." Still, he could not deny the truth. The impossible had already been broken. As the days stretched into weeks, the valley changed even more. Families began to bring food and water for Ryan. Hunters brought meat, farmers brought bread, and children brought fruit. Though the humans' own supplies were enough, he accepted their gifts with gratitude. The people did not say it aloud, but their offerings carried a message. You are no longer alone in this struggle. One morning, a group of young Terrans stepped forward carrying their own tools. They had sharpened stone axes, iron blades, and heavy hammers. Their voices were eager but unsure. "Let us help," one said. Ryan paused, considering them. He could see their spirit, their wish to join him. But he also saw the weakness of their tools. He shook his head gently. "Your blades will break, as they always have. This task needs steel, harder than what you carry. Watch for now. Learn. There will be a time when your strength is needed." The youths lowered their heads, disappointed, but they stayed to watch. And as they watched, their hearts grew stronger. Day after day, the tree groaned under the weight of new scars. Sap dripped down its trunk, forming black rivers across the bark. The poisoned ground around its base grew darker, as if the tree itself was resisting the strikes. Some Terran whispered in fear, saying the tree might fight back. Others said its silence meant it was finally weakening. Ryan said nothing. He only kept striking. His silence became part of the labor itself, a rhythm of action without wasted words. As weeks passed, even the elders could not deny the change. The shadow tree, though still massive and tall, no longer looked untouchable. Its base was marked, its bark broken in ways the Terran had never seen. It stood, but not proudly. It stood as if waiting for the end. Dorn spoke one evening to the gathered villagers. "We are seeing what we once thought impossible, but do not think this labor is easy. This man gives all his strength each day. He will need more than his arms if the tree is to fall. He will need our faith, and perhaps when the time comes, our hands." The people listened, and something spread among them, something fragile yet powerful. It was hope, but also pride. Not the pride of their past failures, but the pride of watching a new path open before them. One night, after a long day of labor, Ryan sat by the fire with Dorn. His hands were wrapped in cloth to cover the blisters. His face was tired, but his eyes were calm. Dorn studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You are unlike us," the elder said. "We have lived with this tree for generations. It has broken our will, yet you strike it as if you do not carry the same weight. Why?" Ryan looked into the fire. "Because I am not bound by your past. I do not see centuries of failure when I look at this tree. I see only a challenge. And when humans see a challenge, we do not bow. We persist." Dorn was silent. He had no answer, for those words carried a truth he could not deny. The following days tested Ryan further. His muscles screamed with pain. His axe dulled and needed sharpening, and storms rolled through the valley, drenching the ground with rain. Yet he returned each morning, standing before the shadow tree with steady resolve. When the storms ended, when the skies cleared, the people saw him striking again, as if the world itself could not stop him, and the Terran, once bound by despair, began to change as well. They no longer gathered only to watch. Some sang songs, to give him rhythm as he worked. Children cheered with each swing. Women carried water not only for him but for the crowd that now spent their days at the tree's edge. Men built shelters to shade them from the sun so they could remain and witness. The valley, once silent in the shadow of despair, now rang with life. The shadow tree was still standing, still vast, still powerful, but it was no longer eternal. Every scar cut into it was proof that nothing, not even the mightiest curse, could last forever before human will. The morning of the tree's final day began like any other. The sun rose slowly over the valley of Noril, its golden light spilling across the hills and rivers. The people gathered once more at the poisoned ground, where they had gathered for many weeks, and as always, Rian stood at the base of the shadow tree, his axe in hand, his eyes steady. But something was different this morning. The tree no longer looked proud. Its bark was cut in deep scars, wide and long. Dark sap oozed down its trunk, in thick streams, staining the earth below. The roots no longer stretched with the same strength. Some had cracked, split open by the blows that had reached them. The shadow tree still towered, but its weight leaned ever so slightly to one side, as if it no longer wished to stand. The Terran felt it too. They did not whisper doubts as they once had. They did not ask if the human would fail. Their voices were filled with anticipation, for the impossible now seemed close enough to touch. Children clutched each other's hands. Elders stood tall, leaning forward on their staffs, refusing to blink for fear of missing the moment. Dorn, the silver-bearded elder, felt his heart race in a way it had not in many years. He had lived long enough to see countless failures, yet here, before his old eyes, the impossible was bending. Ryan lifted his axe. His arms were leaner now, his hands rough with scars, his clothes worn from labor. Yet his spirit was unbroken. He took a breath, steady and deep, and struck. The sound rang out. Crack! He struck again. Crack! Each swing was followed by a groan deep inside the trunk, a sound like thunder rumbling from the heart of the tree. The ground trembled faintly, the poisoned soil shivering beneath their feet. The Terran gasped, but did not look away. Ryan kept striking, sweat pouring down his face, muscles burning with every blow. His breath came heavy, but his rhythm did not falter. Each cut sank deeper into the great trunk, each wound weakening the giant that had ruled the valley for centuries. Then it happened. With one final strike, the axe bit deep, and the shadow tree gave a sound unlike any before. A great groan, long and low, rolled across the valley. Birds scattered from the hillsides. The earth shook beneath the people's feet. The roots snapped with sharp cracks like thunder splitting the ground. The shadow tree was falling. The Terran cried out, their voices rising as one. Some shouted with joy, others with awe. Children screamed in wonder. The elders held their staffs, tightly, eyes wide with tears. The tree leaned, its massive trunk bending with a slow, terrible grace. The branches creaked and tore the air, casting long shadows that danced wildly across the valley. Then, with a crash that shook the earth and sent dust soaring into the sky, the shadow tree struck the ground. The valley roared with the sound of its fall. Stones leapt from the soil, dust rose in clouds, and the poisoned roots tore from the earth as if ripped by unseen hands. The shadow that had stretched across the valley for generations vanished in an instant. Light flooded the ground where it had never reached before. The Terran stood frozen, unable to believe their eyes. The shadow tree, their curse and their despair, the thing that had resisted their every attempt for centuries, now lay broken across the valley floor. Its branches sprawled wide, its trunk split, its sap leaking into the dirt like black rivers. It was not eternal. It had never been eternal. It had fallen. For a long moment there was silence. The people did not know what to say. Some stared at the shattered trunk. Others looked at the human who stood before it, his chest rising and falling. With heavy breaths, his axe still in hand. Then, slowly, the silence broke. A child clapped. Another shouted. Then the voices rose together in a great cheer that shook the valley as much as the fall of the tree. "He did it!" they cried. "The human cut the tree. The curse is broken! Tears ran down Dorn's face as he lifted his staff high. His voice trembled, but his words were clear. We have lived in the shadow for too long. Now we stand in the light again. Remember this day, for it is the day we were freed. The Terran rushed forward, though still careful not to touch the poisoned ground too closely. They stood as near as they dared, looking upon the fallen tree with wide eyes. They had imagined this moment in dreams, but reality was greater. The shadow tree was not only fallen, it was defeated, and at the center of it all stood Ryan, tired but unbroken. His eyes were not filled with triumph, but with quiet resolve. He looked upon the fallen tree not as a trophy, but as the end of one burden and the beginning of another. That night, the valley was alive with celebration. Fires burned bright, songs were sung, and stories began to form. The children danced, shouting the tale of the human who cut down the tree that no Terran could touch. Families feasted together, smiling in a way they had not in many years. But amid the joy, Ryan remained thoughtful. He sat by the edge of the poisoned ground, looking at the fallen trunk. The people came to thank him, to praise him. But he shook, his head gently each time. I did not do this alone, he said. I struck with steel, but your eyes, your voices, your hope gave me strength. This victory belongs to all of us. Dorn sat beside him, nodding slowly. Perhaps that is true. But do not deny your part, human. You carried the will we had lost. You gave us the courage to believe again. That is no small gift. Ryan said nothing more, but his gaze did not leave the fallen tree. For while the Terran saw only the end of their curse, he saw the scar it had left on the valley. The soil was poisoned, the ground broken, the air heavy with sap. To cut the tree was not enough. Something more was needed. The Terran did not yet know this. They only knew freedom and light. They slept that night with hearts unburdened, dreaming of new harvests, of children playing in fields where shadow no longer stretched. But Ryan, as he sharpened his axe once more by the firelight, thought of what must come next. For where something harmful is taken away, something good must be planted in its place. The valley of Noril did not sleep long after the fall of the shadow tree. For many nights the people celebrated, singing songs around great fires, telling again and again the story of the human who had cut down what they could not. Children laughed, and elders smiled as if they were young again. The air seemed lighter without the towering shadow stretching across their homes, but when the dust of joy settled, the people began to see the truth Ryan had seen on the first night after the fall. The tree was gone, yet its poison remained. The ground where the roots had sunk was black and cracked. No grass grew there. No bird landed on its surface. The sap that bled from the broken trunk was thick and dark, spreading slowly like spilled oil. It smelled harsh, making the air heavy and bitter. Some Terran tried to plant seeds near the fallen trunk, but nothing sprouted. Others poured water upon the ground, but it rolled away without soaking in. The poison was deeper than they had believed. Fear began to creep back into their hearts. The shadow was gone, but the land was still wounded. One evening, as the people gathered around the poisoned ground, voices rose in worry. What if it never heals? One asked. What if the tree returns? Another whispered. Have we only traded shadow for waste? Their words grew heavy with doubt, but Ryan stepped forward. He placed his axe upon the ground and lifted a small pouch he carried at his side. In it lay a single seed. This land is broken, he said in his calm, steady voice. But broken things can be healed. I cut down the tree that cursed your valley. Now, I will plant another in its place, the crowd murmured. A seed? Could a seed answer poison? Dorn, the silver-bearded elder, stepped closer. His eyes shone with both hope and doubt. What seed do you carry, human? Ryan opened the pouch and showed it. The seed was smooth and round, its surface pale, almost glowing in the firelight. "It is from my own people," he said. "Where I come from, we plant this tree to bring life back to dead fields. Its roots spread wide, its leaves drink deep of the sun, and its fruit feeds both bird and beast. It grows slowly, but once it takes hold, no poison remains." The Terran fell silent. The idea seemed too simple. Yet had not the human already done what none of them could? Ryan stepped to the edge of the poisoned ground. He knelt and dug with his hands, though the soil was rough and hard. He worked until his fingers bled, but he did not stop. At last, he made a hole deep enough for the seed. He placed it gently into the earth and covered it with soil. Then he poured water from a flask he carried, letting it soak the ground. The people watched closely, but nothing happened. The earth remained dark. No sprout appeared. Some shook their heads. "It will not grow," they whispered. But Dorn raised his staff. "Do not rush the work of life. The shadow tree grew in strength for centuries, but so too must healing take its time." Ryan nodded in quiet agreement. He stood and faced the crowd. "This seed is not magic. It is only life. Life takes patience, care, and hope. I can plant it, but you must tend it, sing to it, water it, protect it, give it the chance to grow." The people listened, and slowly their doubt softened. From that day onward, the valley changed once again. No longer did the people gather to curse the shadow tree or to fear its poison. Instead, they came to tend the place where the new seed lay hidden in the soil. Children brought water in clay jars. Elders stood watch, keeping animals from trampling the ground. Farmers carried compost and spread it around the seed's resting place. Weeks passed. The seed remained unseen. Some grew restless. "Perhaps it is dead," they said. But Ryan urged patience. He spent every day beside the seed, speaking softly to the soil as if it could hear him. He sang low songs in his own tongue, strange words. The Terran could not understand, but they carried warmth, and the people began to hum along. Then, one morning, as the first rays of dawn touched the valley, a child ran through the village shouting, "It has come! It has come!" The people rushed to the poisoned ground. There, breaking through the black soil, was a small sprout. Its stem was thin but strong, its leaves a bright green unlike any in the valley. The Terran fell to their knees. Tears filled their eyes. They touched the earth around it, careful not to harm it, and for the first time in generations they felt warmth in the soil. The sprout grew slowly but surely. Each day its leaves stretched wider, its stem thicker. The poison around it began to fade. Where the soil had been black, small patches of brown appeared, then green shoots of grass. Birds returned to the valley, circling above and singing as they had not sung for many years. Hope spread like fire. The Terran began to plant their own seeds around the sprout, and though many failed, some began to take root. Life was returning, piece by piece. One evening, as the young tree stretched toward the sky, Dorn stood beside Rianne. The elder's voice trembled, but it carried pride. "You have given us more than freedom, human. You have given us a future. We will tend this tree as you taught us. And when our children's children walk these fields, they will speak your name with honor." Ryan looked at the young tree, its leaves trembling in the wind. "Do not speak my name," he said softly. "Speak of what you have done. You chose to believe. You chose to care. That is what will live on." The elder smiled. "Perhaps you are right. Yet even if we do not speak it, we will not forget." The stars rose above the valley that night, brighter than before. The people sat around the sprout, singing gentle songs, their voices weaving together with the sound of the wind in the leaves. For the first time in countless years, the valley felt alive. The shadow tree had ruled them in silence and fear. The new tree was small, fragile, and quiet, but it carried something far stronger than shadow. It carried promise. Seasons passed in the valley of Noril. The sprout that Ryan planted grew into a young tree with wide leaves that glimmered when touched by sunlight. The poisoned ground around it healed, little by little, until grass and flowers returned. Where once there had been silence and fear, now there were voices of children, laughter of families, and songs of birds filling the air. The Terran people had not only gained freedom from the shadow tree, but had also learned something greater. They learned that strength was not only in cutting down what was dark, but also in planting what was light. Ryan remained in the valley for many months after the planting. He worked alongside the Terran, teaching them how to care for the soil, how to use the axe not as a weapon but as a tool, and how to plant seeds with patience. His hands were always busy, yet his heart was calm, for he knew his task was not only to fight, but to guide. Dorn, the elder, grew close to him. Many evenings they sat together near the young tree, speaking of the past and the future. Dorn would ask about Ryan's home, and the human would tell of fields where wheat grew tall, of rivers wide and clear, of orchards heavy with fruit. The Terran listened with wonder, for they had never imagined land so full of life. "You came here as a stranger," Dorn said one night. "Yet you have become part of our story. Even if you leave, your roots are here now, like the tree you planted." Ryan smiled but said nothing. His gaze was fixed on the tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. As the moons turned, the young tree grew stronger. Its roots dug deep into the soil, cleansing the poison. Its shade spread wide, and its fruit, though small, began to appear. Children picked the first fruit with joy, bringing it to their parents, who tasted it and wept, for it was sweet and fresh, unlike anything they had known for centuries. The valley was alive again. But Ryan knew his time among the Terran could not last forever. He had come as a traveler, carrying his axe and his knowledge, and now his heart told him it was time to move on. One morning before the sun rose high, Ryan went to the riverside where his small craft was kept. He began to prepare it for travel, checking its ropes and sails. Yet as he worked, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Dorn, followed by many villagers. "Are you leaving us?" Dorn asked, though he already knew the answer. Ryan stood tall and rested his hand on the axe at his belt. "The valley no longer needs me. The shadow tree is gone, and the new tree grows. You will care for it, and it will care for you. My task is done." A silence fell over the crowd. Some lowered their heads, others whispered among themselves. A child stepped forward, holding a small branch from the new tree. She offered it to Ryan. "Take this," she said softly, "so you remember us." Ryan bent down and accepted the branch with a gentle smile. "I will remember. Always." Dorn stepped closer and placed his hand upon Ryan's shoulder. "You came to us with nothing but your axe, and you gave us everything. We will not forget. You, human, wherever you travel, know that in the valley of Noril, your name is carried in every breath of wind." Ryan's eyes shone, though he did not weep. He looked once more at the valley. The young tree stood tall in the distance, its leaves glowing under the morning sun. Around it, the Terran moved with purpose, their lives no longer bound by fear. He knew they were ready. With a final nod, Ryan stepped into his craft. The river carried him away, slowly at first, then faster as the current grew. The Terran stood on the bank until he was only a shadow on the water, then gone beyond the bend of the river. Time passed as it always does. The young tree became a great tree, its trunk wide, its branches thick with fruit. The valley flourished. Farms stretched across the land, rivers were clear, and villages grew strong. Children no longer asked about the shadow tree, for it was only a story told by elders. Yet they all knew the story of the human. When the Terran gathered at festivals, they sang of him. They told how he cut down the tree they could not, and how he planted another in its place. They told how he taught them patience, courage, and hope. His name was spoken with honor, not as a warrior alone, but as a bringer of life. Generations passed. The tree he planted became the heart tree of the valley. Its roots spread so wide that they touched every field, every stream. Its branches stretched high, and its fruit fed every family. No poison remained, for the roots had cleansed. Travelers who came to the valley marveled at its beauty. They asked how such a place of life could exist, and the Terran would answer with pride. It began with a seed, planted by a human who believed that life was stronger than shadow. And somewhere beyond the stars, perhaps Ryan walked still, his axe at his side, seeking other lands in need of healing. Perhaps he never heard the songs sung in Noril, but the songs rose anyway, carried by the wind, by the leaves of the heart tree, and by the endless sky. The Terran had once been prisoners of a shadow. Now they were keepers of light,